The beginning of the Gulf Coast Women's Center came about because a small group of women in the 1970s read about wife battering in women's magazines and wondered if the Gulf Coast had the same problem. On their own, they investigated our community's need and discovered that domestic violence was as much of a problem here as in other parts of the country. They were determined to do something about it, so they researched, developed, and established the Gulf Coast Women's Center. In 1977, there weren't any public funds to support a shelter, since legislation permitting donations to domestic violence shelters from political entities wasn't passed until 1983. As a result, when the first domestic violence shelter in Mississippi was established, it was with limited funding in an old church building in Biloxi with inadequate heat, no air conditioning, and used furniture and appliances. The facility's condition didn't matter though. Victims of domestic violence came to the shelter and thrived because of the programs offered and the caring and commitment of the early staff. That's what they needed most, and a few dedicated women were able to deliver it.
I served nearly 18 years on the center's board of directors and was able to witness much of its change and expansion. One of the most memorable changes was the new facility's construction, made possible through capital campaign funding. I was also privileged to watch many of its programs start from the beginning, including the Rape Crisis Program that began in 1981, the Children's Program in 1984, and the Domestic Violence Intervention Program for batterers in 1987. Seeing these programs develop from what began strictly as a domestic violence shelter highlighted the shift for me from standard emergency care to comprehensive services for all victims with an emphasis on preventing violence in our community.
It's been called the Women's Center all these years, but most people don't know they serve more than women and domestic violence victims. The Survivors of Homicide program began back in 1998, and it may be one of the lesser-known services by the center, but it's helped my family offering a supportive place to verbally and emotionally react to the sudden violence that has affected us so deeply. Grief is powerful, and learning how to cope with the grief following a homicide has been essential to my family's acceptance and recovery. I'm thankful to the center for helping my loved ones survive that process.
I've been on the board for the past 6 years, and being a member of such an engaging group of volunteers dedicated to helping victims of violence has been personally rewarding for me. And as a representative for law enforcement in our shared community, it's also been a professional privilege to serve as a board member because we rely on the center's specialized training and services for police officers who answer domestic violence calls. Those calls are some of the most dangerous an officer can respond to, and additional training on how to help a victim while maintaining our own personal safety is crucial to this profession. Our department is grateful to have a partnership with an agency that has created and implemented these types of invaluable education outreach programs.
Many don't realize there wasn't a service available to victims of domestic violence in Mississippi before the center opened. But what grew from the passion of a small group of women in 1977 is now the largest, most comprehensive program of its nature in our state, serving over 30,000 victims and answering over 100,000 crisis calls. The center's growth not only includes our services helping victims of human trafficking, providing civil legal services, or helping find employment and housing for families following an abusive relationship, but we've also expanded the definition of who we serve. We don't discriminate. If anyone is in need, including women, children, men, or immigrants, we're here to help. So in honor of our 40-year anniversary, we're proud to announce our name has changed. To reflect the inclusion of our services, we've dropped women's and will now be known as the Gulf Coast Center for Nonviolence. We wouldn't have made it this far and for this long without the continued and generous support of our community, donors, advocates, and volunteers. You make our work possible every day, and we thank you.